I'm Eric Bricker, Director of Illumination, and you're listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. Nowhere in the world celebrates modernism better than Modernism Week in Palm Springs, California. Every February, they have a week-long architecture and design festival, which actually lasts 11 days, and U.S. Modernist Radio is there, interviewing nearly all of Modernism Week's keynote speakers, plus special guests. It all happens at the U.S. Modernist Compound, aka Poolside, at the hip Hotel Skylark. If you are in the mid-century modern, Modernism Week is a joyous festival of mid-century architecture, insightful lectures, plentiful martinis, shopping, nonprofit benefit events, architecture documentary premieres, eye-popping house parties, brilliantly curated house tours, detailed art and architecture exhibits, and so much more. I'm Tom Guild. For some reason, George Smart brings me along with him to Palm Springs. I get to hang out at Kirk Douglas's estate and peer way off in the distance at Bob Hope's mountaintop spaceship house and wonder if we'll ever get to see it up close. Sitting with me poolside at the Hotel Skylark recording the very interviews you're about to hear, here's Mr. Modernism, George Smart.
Hey, thank you, Tom. One of the fun things about going to Palm Springs is there's some stores there, like everywhere, but really specialty stores. I can buy certain blazers in Palm Springs I really can't find anywhere else. And these blazers are, I would say, visually arresting.
Oh, I know which ones you're talking about.
They can stop traffic. I could moonlight on the weekends as a traffic cone or divert cars off the interstate. They're very bright and very colorful and very festive, which is really perfect for sitting around the pool, sipping martinis at some gorgeous modernist house. It's just so much fun. If you're into mid-century modernism, Modernism Week is really the Woodstock, the Olympics of all the architecture that we love. If you want to go with me and Tom to Modernism Week in February 2023 and stay at the U.S. Modernist Compound, then email me at george@usmodernist.org. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs, and by modernist realtor Angela Roll.
In a classic tale that we are largely making up, modernist realtor Angela Roll worked her way through college, dancing like no one's watching to Mambo No. 5 and brilliantly house-flipping Neutra houses, sometimes simultaneously. At 22, following a celebrity-filled party at a famous hillside modernist house in L.A. involving late-night swimming, fig-infused goat cheese, absolute lime, and a new use for WD-40, Angela was recruited to architecture school. There, she spent years in sleep-deprived design studios. Now, she's a modernist real estate agent with specialized design training, advising buyers and sellers on everything, from appropriate renovation to staging a martini party for 200 people from 2,800 miles away. That last sentence is 100% true. Reach her at angelaroll.com. That's ROEHL or 919-995-0550. With over 200 awards, two speakers at this year's Modernism Week are among the best-known and respected architects in America. Their firm is a leader in socially responsible housing, and they just won the 2022 National AIA Gold Medal. Returning podcast guest Larry Scarpa was born in Queens, New York. In 1976, Larry's father opened a restaurant in Winter Haven, Florida. And as a senior in high school, Larry, while working there, met a regular customer, architect Gene Leedy, who became his mentor. Larry worked for Leedy in Florida and Paul Rudolph in New York before opening his own firm. Architect Angela Brooks won the 2009 AIA Young Architects Award and the 2020 AIA California Maybeck Award, among many honors. She was the project architect for Colorado Court in Santa Monica, the first U.S. multifamily low-income housing project to be LEED certified. Together, in addition to their architecture firm, Brooks and Scarpa founded Livable Places, a nonprofit created to stimulate neighborhood revitalization in Los Angeles. Here's George poolside at the U.S. Modernist compound with Angie Brooks and Larry Scarpa.
So let's start off with this. How did the two of you meet?
We met in school at the University of Florida.
Okay.
I was born and raised in Florida. Larry moved there when he was younger and went to the University of Florida as an undergrad, came back for his graduate school work, and we met when I think I was 2 years into my undergraduate degree before we met.
Okay.
And it was 2 weeks before he was to take off to Italy on a fellowship.
So after we met, I was gone for a year and a half, but we stayed in touch, and I came back to teach at Florida while Angie was finishing up her undergraduate degree, and that's the end of that story. That was 35 plus years ago.
And that was before cell phones, so we actually wrote...
Yeah, that was pre-internet,
We
pre-cell
wrote postcards and letters
Yeah.
back and forth, and then I tried to learn how to speak Italian so I could talk to Larry, and that was on the landline phone in my parents' house. And I would get the time, try to get up early, call, but I could only speak to, what was his name?
Papa Due More,
who was this old Italian man who did not have any patience whatsoever
didn't
for an
like people.
American
Yeah.
woman who couldn't speak Italian. So he would hang up on me, and then Larry would come back to the hotel after the day of whatever he was doing, and he would tell Larry, "Your crazy American girlfriend called," you know.
You go, no, not again.
At least I knew the message got
Papa
through.
Due More would lock you out if you came in after midnight.
Oh, he
that
would?
Was it. Yep, it was like, what do they call that? You turn into a pumpkin after midnight there.
Curfew. You had a
you live on
curfew.
the street.
Did that happen to you there?
No, not that. I managed to get a key eventually, from him.
You were a trusted person.
I guess you could say that.
Now, when you were a senior in high school, you waited on somebody very well known.
I did. My family had a restaurant in Winter Haven, Florida. We had moved from Miami, and I played on the baseball team for Winter Haven High. And I always wanted to be an architect since as long as I could remember. I was practice one day. The field fence was right up against, in left field, a Gene Leedy house. So when I jumped the fence to go retrieve the baseball, I saw the Strang house. It was like magic, So every time a ball went over the fence, I was the first to dash over there to get the ball over the fence. And eventually Carl Strang, the owner, saw me spending a lot of time there. He knew something was up, and, he showed me the house. And unbeknownst to me, Gene used to come into my family's little Italian restaurant. So I started to keep my portfolio there. Here's a high school kid with
and
drawings.
Gene Leedy was the architect.
Yeah, Gene
of the
Leedy
house.
was the architect of the Strang house.
And Carl Strang was the father of Max, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
We've had Max on the show.
Yeah. So I'd have my portfolio in case I was there when Gene showed up, so I would go out and impress him with my high school portfolio. You know where that went.
Yeah. So you're serving him some pie and a couple of sketches, that kind of thing?
Basically. I eventually did work for him, but I sort of forced myself upon him, as Gene would tell you if he was still alive. He said, I showed up one day and he was sitting at a desk and said, I'm here to work for you.
I guess that's the way to do it, right?
That is a way.
Now, I assume you've seen the documentary that Max did.
Yes. Yeah.
So that is so cool, the opening of that. It's like no other documentary I've ever seen in architecture, where Max and the brother.
Yeah. Ingram.
So
They were little kids' friends, They grew up together.
So the movie opens up where Max and Ingram are sitting out in front of the house, smoking cigars, talking about Gene Leedy. It's just really cool.
He was a character. Gene.
Yeah, Leedy was quite the character. In fact, my brother used to joke about him. He'd say to you, Ace, nothing worse to a good story is an eyewitness. So he could tell a good story, and his children could too.
Now, he was in love with these very specific kind of double T-shaped concrete beams that he made a lot of things out of?
He did, yeah.
What are those, and how did they work?
Well, they're prefabricated concrete, super high strength. There's a plant right down the road in Lakeland, the next town over from Winter Haven, and Gene was always looking to how to make these beautiful, simple spaces, powerful, and the concrete double T's were, what I thought was part of his genius. He took that mid-century modern, what he learned when he worked for Paul Rudolph, and kind of turned it into a very robust interpretation of that kind of space. So it was the same principles and the same concepts, except on steroids, so to speak.
Yeah. And then you worked for Rudolph, too, for a time.
I did as well, yeah.
What years were that?
That was in the early 80s, and that was right after my grad school, right before I went back to graduate.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is before Italy?
It was before Italy, yeah.
Okay.
So between my undergrad and my grad.
Okay. And what projects did you work on in his office? Do you remember?
I worked on most of the things in Southeast Asia. So we were working on a lot of the
Lippo Center,
It was the Bonn Center. It was Jakarta and Singapore. There were many projects we worked on then. He had kind of, postmodernism was reaching its height at that point. So he had done a competition that he lost, that IMP won. But one of the developers for that loved his submission so much, he just started hiring Rudolph directly to do these buildings all over Asia. And so he was very busy in Southeast Asia mostly then.
Yeah, he became a rock star in that part of the world. It's kind of like David Hasselhoff being big in Germany.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, he spent about 3 months out of the year there. He would make his regular trip every year to Southeast Asia.
And he did these beautiful renderings of Penn, and Larry would do the renderings for him in his studio.
I used to do the Rudolph drawings when I was in school, and they never looked as good, and I used to beat myself. Why don't my drawings look that good? I studied them, they should look as good. And then when I went to work for Rudolph, obviously he knew I could draw. And so I wound up sitting next to him. He would basically make a sketch at the right size and the view he'd want, and you'd kind of trace them, in Rapidograph, but you still had to have some skill to do that. And I would draw away, and he'd go, no, don't do it like that, do it like this. And I'd go, oh, and no, don't do it that way, do it like this. And the light bulb turned on for me. And I'm like, no wonder my drawings look like crap, and I got very good at them very quick.
You're doing the whole Luke Skywalker thing, studying with the master, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I remember I was so proud the first time he came up and signed the drawing, and then as I would do them, I started to get resentful, because I'd spend 3 weeks on a drawing, and he was getting to the point where he would virtually not touch it, then he'd come sign it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm going to sign one of those drawings,
So when I met Larry in school, he showed me one of these drawings, and he said, do you see anything in this drawing, in this rendering? And I would look closely, and I said, no. And finally he pointed out to me the name Scarpa was in the shade.
I'd stipple them in the bushes.
Of the shade of the bushes or somewhere, because
like
they were
Hirschfeld,
just huge
the famous cartoonist, right?
So I was so scared.
Sprinkling his name around.
I was so scared when I first did it. I was like, he came over, in the morning, he looked at me, he's like, hey, are you okay? And I'm like, I was scared he'd see it. I'm like, oh, I'm just not feeling well. And then, he came over and signed the drawing, and I was so relieved. And then I looked, and I had made it so small I couldn't even find it when he walked away.
Well, Angie, tell me about your firm's work in housing for the homeless and what developments are being made in that now.
Well, when I became an architect, I always wanted to help people, and I thought I could do urban planning. So when I graduated from graduate school for me at SciArc in California, I wanted to work for cities and assist them with how to make their suburbs better.
Angie was accused of doing a Berkeley thesis at
SciArc, because it was about neighborhoods and communities. And so I eventually worked for a nonprofit development company because I didn't want to work for a traditional architect.
By the way, her schoolwork actually won a PA award.
Oh, it did?
Yep, that was called Post Suburbia.
It was the new public realm competition.
Yeah, so
we probably have that magazine in our archives.
Yeah, it
probably,
was.
Yeah.
It was looking at new ways to envision the suburbs.
Mm-hmm. So I wanted to work on this bigger development issues, and it was called the LA Community Design Center at the time. So I worked with a lot of developers who were doing affordable housing at the time. And so a lot of the work that we started doing, my clients are people that I knew way back when. So for me, design is something that can help people in their lives.
Yes.
And no one was really designing great affordable housing at the time. Why not? It's not like it costs any more money than what anyone else can do. You just have to design it well.
Yeah.
So that was something that I was really interested in. And when Larry and I started working together, we've been working together for 21 years. It was when he was starting to do multifamily housing. And so I had a background in doing it for 4 or 5 years. And so when we got together, we were able to kind of exponentially do more of that.
I grew up, in a family restaurant, small family restaurant. And every day, it was a family affair. You can imagine Italian family. There was a lot of headbutting going on, daily. And I watched my father, and my stepmother, and I'm like, I'm never going to work with my spouse. Yeah. Never. And,
we didn't want to work together for first.
And Angie was in grad school, so we just we avoided it, but because I had a very small operation, when we got busy, I begged Angie to come work at night, in
we would do
grad
competitions
school.
Together, fun things, that we weren't getting paid for, and then work in our own respective offices.
Yeah, but then you also worked, you double timed.
And then I would help
even
you
when
work
she had another
when
job because we couldn't afford to hire anyone. So.
Well, isn't the moral of the story, Larry, is not to open a restaurant with your spouse? I think that's
maybe
the real lesson here.
Maybe.
So when the economy really tanked and we were on a 4-day work week, I think in 2009 or 8, I told Larry, I said, well, if architecture completely dries up and we have absolutely no work, we can always open a restaurant because Larry can cook, And he took one look at me and said, there is absolutely no way we are opening a restaurant.
Yeah,
None.
I'll go with a pot on the beach first.
Yeah.
So anyway, we've grown into we have clients now who actually come to us and ask us to do work for them, which is really great.
Yeah, but when our son was born, because we had worked enough together, not officially, and we always got along famously, we were like, why aren't we working together? And that was, when our son was born. He's 22 now. It was like, we should just work together. There was some security there, and we've been doing that ever since.
Well, tell me about the housing for the homeless part.
So we finished a project in Los Angeles for the Skid Row Housing Trust, actually several projects we've done for them. And we're doing some new work in Florida right now.
We
City
have an
of Miami
office
Beach.
there as well.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. It's sort of a part of our business. We always do it. So we work on a lot of different building types, and that's one of the building types that we work on. And I actually think it makes us better because housing for the homeless, affordable housing, they have really tight budgets, very tight schedules. And for you to get something designed well within that really restrictive framework, you have to really know what you're doing and have to have a set of principles. And so we use that on all of our projects.
We're doing a senior affordable housing in Miami Beach and Normandy Isles. It's a historic, neighborhood of very wealthy people. So you can kind of imagine what happens there. It's kind of become our, I guess, in some ways, specialty. We're the go-to people for when the projects are tough and the communities are tough. We seem to be able to get it done.
Well, it needs to go through historic preservation.
Has resistance to housing for the homeless gotten better, gotten worse? What do you think?
Well, I don't think there's any resistance necessarily to housing the homeless. I think there's a resistance to having homeless people on the streets and living outside.
Or in their neighborhood.
And,
but you got to build these places. Saying. Yeah, they got to build these things somewhere, and it seems like nobody wants them.
It's too difficult.
Well, there's a misconception of who the people are that live in these projects. So when you mention affordable housing, the image that people conjure up is the person living on the street, laying around with needles around them. And that is about 0.1% of the homeless population. That is like so rare. You know, you have more of a chance of being struck by lightning than finding those people in affordable housing projects. They're people like you and I that just are not very different. They've just had a string of bad luck. So people always conjure up the worst of who lives there, and they're really normal people. If you line them up in a crowd with normal people, you could not pick them out, you know, in a conversation.
So as architects and as someone who loves urban planning, how do you get communities to embrace more of these? Because I know in our area of North Carolina and other cities that I've thought about, there really is a great deal of resistance to building these communities, not just because of the preconceived notions, but just kind of flat out, we don't want them under any conditions. We don't care who lives there.
Yeah, you have to show people the successful models. So Skid Row Housing Trust has been doing it for 30 years, and they actually have, it's called Housing First, which means it doesn't matter if someone has substance abuse issues or other credit
mental
problems,
disabilities.
you know, we need to get people housed first, because you can't work on a person's issues while they're living outside. You have to house people first. And I think that's the first step. We have to get people into housing. And they have successful models. You can walk through these buildings, and some people think that there are expensive condominiums that they can buy. And these are beautiful buildings that people live in who were previously homeless. They're small little 245 square foot apartments for people. Then they might share a kitchen and have, you know, socialization issues and gardens where they can hang out and do other things. But they're no different than the rest of us.
Often people will come up, you know, even when we're around, and try and find out if they see us around the building, how can I rent an apartment in here? You know, so there's...
And when we tell them their income has to be $50,000 a year for a family of four, you know, in Los Angeles, you know, obviously
they're
they can't.
a bit shocked. But it's proven, the research has proven that diverse communities are the most successful,
and
they're
resilient.
the most vibrant, and the most resilient. You have to have that. And, you know, some of the biggest developers in the United States, like Related, started out in affordable housing, and they still do it. They have a mixed model that, you know, almost becomes invisible. And so it largely is that. I just don't, you know, really understand it. There's a difference between housing, affordable housing, and special needs housing. Those are very, very different.
And some of the private developers, well, some cities call it inclusionary housing as well. So if you're a private developer and you want to develop, say, 60 units of housing for market rate housing, if you provide 10% of your units for affordability limits, you can get certain incentives. And so some cities actually require that or mandate that, and some cities don't. And I think we need to have that. I think we need to have that, and we also need to have the nonprofits that develop affordable housing as well.
I believe that the inclusionary model is the model where they're mixed people within the same building, and those get approved a lot easier, and you can't really tell them in any way. You know, anything that's monocultured isn't a great answer, and I believe that too. Like I tell Angie, I said, I think our nonprofit clients should be forced to have a percentage of for-profit units in there. You know, and vice versa.
And figure out how to do it in both scenarios.
And ironically, it costs more money to build the 100% affordable projects that we do for our nonprofit
They're about
clients.
20%
it costs more money.
20% more expensive than market rate housing.
Because of all the restrictions that come with the funding and the financing of it.
I see. Well, I just want to thank you both for all the work that you're doing in this area, and thanks for stopping by.
You're welcome. Yeah, it was really great to be here.
That was George Smart with Angie Brooks and Larry Scarpa.
Architect and developer Bruce Becker is the president of Becker & Becker Associates in Westport, Connecticut. With an MBA and a master's degree in architecture from Yale, Becker was a manager for Prudential's development operations in Northern California, overseeing $800 million of mixed-use development, including the San Francisco Hilton and the Park Hyatt Embarcadero. During Modernism Week 2022, Bruce spoke about transforming Marcel Breuer's New Haven, Connecticut masterpiece, the Pirelli Building, into Hotel Marcel as a model for sustainable hospitality. It's also next door to a huge IKEA, and at one point, the building served as a giant billboard for the IKEA. Here's my conversation in sunny Palm Springs with Bruce Becker. Bruce, before we get started talking about the Pirelli Building, which I'm thrilled to talk about with you today, you've heard recently about the destruction of the Geller House?
Absolutely. What a shame.
What a tragedy in New York. Happened a number of months ago, and it's just sent reverberations throughout the whole preservation community.
You know, it's tragic. These modernist icons are one of a kind. And personally, there was a really interesting house designed by Paul Rudolph in Westport, Connecticut, where I live with my wife, that was torn down right before we moved into town. And I think the preservation community, each time one of these senseless acts of destruction happens, I think it reminds the whole preservation community how essential it is to protect these buildings. But, you know, often we're powerless to do it. In the case of the Pirelli Building, you know, the fact that it's still standing is because of efforts over 25 years ago of a group of advocates to keep the building from being taken down. Part of it was the back of the building was removed, but because this group of passionate architects and preservationists gathered together and got the building listed on the Connecticut State Register and also lobbied heavily with the city of New Haven, there wasn't a feasible plan at the time, but 20 years later, we were able to work out a plan to save the building and put it to a new use.
Why was the back of the building removed?
Well, the back of the building was a two-story addition that when Armstrong Rubber Company commissioned Marcel Breuer to build its headquarters, it was an interesting...
This was what year about?
The building was conceived of in 1967, and it was opened only 2 years later in late 1969. And the area that it's in, which is really the intersection of the two major interstates in Connecticut, 95 and 91, right down by the Long Wharf waterfront, actually at the very location of the original Long Wharf, the mile-long wharf that connected basically all of New England to the waterways of the East Coast. You know, it was the gateway to New England, and it remains that way. But that whole area was filled in, waterfront, and the city had these bold ideas during urban renewal. The visionary mayor at the time, who's either gets credit or blame for urban renewal, you know, it was very destructive to many neighborhoods in New Haven, but Dick Lee, to his credit, offered up this parcel of land to Armstrong Rubber to build their headquarters on two conditions. He wanted a prominent building. He wanted it to be 10 stories tall, and it had to be by a world-class architect, and he offered to suggest names. It turns out I just got the files from the city archives, which had been sort of behind closed doors for 50 years, but they were finally made available.
Freedom of information request?
Yeah, it took me about 4 years of effort to get them, but I finally got the file, and he only suggested one architect, which is Marcel Breuer.
Wow.
And the letters...
So you may pick from this list.
Yeah. But I think he gave them a real deal on the land, I think for free, even though the cost for the foundations was probably more than it would cost to buy land elsewhere. But he was able to persuade them to build this prominent building to help put New Haven on the map. You know, outside of the Yale, which obviously already had sort of a who's who of architecture with the Saarinen ice rink, hockey rink. Also, they had Paul Rudolph's A&A building at the time.
Yes.
Had a collection of amazing museums by Lou Kahn, you know, the British Art Center and the Yale Art Gallery. But I think that there was a little bit of a rivalry, town gown rivalry, where the city fathers wanted to see commercial buildings of the same caliber. So this deal was cut to bring in Marcel Breuer. But the interesting thing is Armstrong Rubber really only wanted a two-story building. So what they wanted to have sort of an office for their executives and then a large plant for basically researching and doing prototypes for their tires.
They weren't making tires.
They actually made some tires there.
Really?
But it was sort of their
Like
where
a
they were
test kitchen?
R&D kind of thing.
R&D.
Okay. Yeah.
But anyhow, so the design evolved with essentially a 9-story building, but with 2 floors missing. And this became this most iconic building as you drive along the East Coast, where there's a void. You look through the void to the city beyond. And that is actually the primary architectural gesture. And the building's cantilevered with these huge trusses so that you see through it. And I'm giving you a long answer to a simple question. But the back of the building was taken down because IKEA came in to build their store. The building had been vacant for 20 years. Since IKEA built its store, but it was vacant for about 5 years up until then. And they were trying to market the site, and IKEA was the only real interested party. But they needed surface parking. And so the bulk of the footprint of the building was this 2-story addition in the back, which really wasn't that visible. And it seemed like a reasonable deal with the preservation community as long as there was a commitment to keep the building standing. So I've been driving by that building since I was a little guy going skiing with my family, and then saw it vacant. I went to architecture school at Yale. I also got an MBA there. So I spent 4 years in the mid-'80s when the building was still occupied. But then after that...
Yeah, how long was it vacant?
It was vacant from about 1999 until we undertook the redevelopment. We bought the building basically January 1st, 2020. So we've only been at it for a couple years, but we're almost ready to open this 165-room hotel. It's going to be a high design boutique hotel.
So do you own the building yourself now?
Yeah, I'm an architect developer.
Okay.
And I really am an architect designer first, and I got into development because I'm very idealistic, and I couldn't count on finding developer clients that would be as interested and passionate about design and preservation and particularly sustainability as I am. So I educated myself, and I sort of developed this integrated practice of architecture and design. I'm the architect of record and design architect. I have a lot of really important collaborators, from our sustainability consultants, Stephen Winters Associates, to our interior design firm, Dutch East Design, to some really innovative engineering talent. But we sort of marshaled the whole project together. And we conceived a plan working with IKEA, who owned the property. We had to persuade them to part with it. It was a billboard that they advertised their sale products on.
But it's not an IKEA store adjacent.
There is.
There is. Okay.
The only IKEA in Connecticut is immediately next door to this building. So there are sometimes 15,000 people a day that come to that IKEA. And it actually, I think, has more shoppers than any downtown shopping district in New Haven on a busy day.
Oh, I would think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to fill in the blanks here, the name of the building, Pirelli, comes from the fact that they bought Armstrong. Is that
exactly,
right?
Yeah. So Armstrong Rubber Company was a big tire company for a while.
Yeah.
They then became sort of a captive tire producer for Sears, and then Sears sort of squeezed them on pricing, and that was the end of them, and they finally got sold to Pirelli. Pirelli occupied the building. Of course, Pirelli is still a very prominent tire company, but they gave it up as a headquarters in the late 90s, and then the building with the land around it was sold to IKEA.
Now, when you took over the building, how was it? Was it a mess? Was it structurally okay? What kind of challenges did you encounter?
Yeah, well, the thing I loved about the building was the facade and the structure were in perfect shape. It was built with a precast concrete panel. It was a proprietary system called Mosaic. If you flip through architectural journals of the 60s, you'll see,
which we have done. Yes.
Yeah, you'll see full page ads for Mosaic precast concrete.
MOSAI?
Exactly.
Okay.
And in fact, I redeveloped my last project before this was redeveloping the Hartford National Bank, which became the Bank of America Tower in Hartford, Connecticut, which was also built with Mosaic panels designed by Welton Beckett, and one of his biggest commissions on the East Coast. So I got very familiar and affectionate for these precast panels because they're stronger than granite. They're about 6,000 psi. They're bulletproof. And I figured this facade is going to last for 200 years. The structure, because it was actually designed to cantilever, and Marcel Breuer was a master of marketing. He he was sort of caught between the mayor of New Haven, who wanted this large landmark, and of course, as an architect, he probably was happy to build a big, prominent, iconic building. And then his client, at one point, there was an extra floor there, and his staff was unhappy because he conceded to give up this one office floor. But it turned out that his client actually didn't need several of the floors, but he succeeded in building to this scale that I think was something the city demanded. But one of his arguments was you could always add 2 more office floors in the void of the 3rd and the 4th floors, which
Later
were
on.
non-existent.
So that void is big enough to add 2 floors?
2 floors, yeah.
That's
In
a
fact,
big void.
Yeah, the floors
Okay.
are numbered. There is a 3rd
really?
and 4th
The
floor
elevator?
that doesn't exist. And some people have said, well, why? What are you going to do with those floors? You're going to put something there. But because it's so close to the highway, that's actually the least habitable space on
I
the
was
site.
thinking, you could put a little 9-hole golf course or
Yeah, but the problem is you'd be blown off of it because there are sometimes 60-mile-an-hour winds that come through.
Oh.
You're about 100 feet from the highway.
you call that a wind hazard.
Yeah, so it's exactly. But because we developed the building as the first Passive House certified hotel, I don't know how familiar your listeners would be with Passive House, but it's a European
sustainability
standard, which super insulates the building envelope, so it's almost like a thermos.
Yeah.
It reduces the energy demands by over 80%.
Oh, so you're leveraging that concrete.
Yeah, so the concrete is an airtight shield because it's quite thick. But then we have a whole plan of different types of insulation to get us this amazing thermal barrier. And then we have the first triple glazed windows that have ever been approved by the National Park Service. We got the building listed on the National Register of Historic Places, which
Okay.
it has
and
pros
the Park
and cons.
Service administers that? Or?
They administer it,
Okay.
but the real benefit is that you're able to then qualify for federal historic tax credits and typically state credits where they exist, as they do in Connecticut. The project was very difficult. I'm not a patron. I'm an architect that usually earns a living by having clients who pay architecture fees. So I had to come up with a way of financing this that made sense, not as a vanity project, but as an economic real estate project, which could attract third-party financing. But the key to making that work was to use the historic tax credits. So we had to meet all of those requirements, which were pretty extensive. And one of our big challenges was getting them to approve the first triple glazed window in the history of the National Park Service, which we did in this case. We did that by carefully reviewing the Breuer drawings and finding evidence that there were interior storm windows, so that the profile of the window overall was consistent with the original Breuer vision for the windows.
So is it a challenge to cool it in the summer?
No, whether it's heating or cooling, in fact, the building is greatest energy need is for cooling. It's not for heating, interestingly,
Okay.
because with such a well-insulated envelope, the people who occupy the building heat most of it.
Yeah.
In fact, if it was left to itself, it basically stabilizes about 62 degrees inside.
Oh.
But then when you put people in it, it gets up to about 70. So it takes very little energy to heat and cool.
Oh.
We've also done a lot of other things. We use power over Ethernet for all the lighting and the shade control. So we have a DC electrical system in the building, which reduces the
The
lighting.
lights are done through Ethernet.
Exactly. And
As a former IT guy, it's just...
all of the lighting in the whole building only uses 3,000 watts.
Wow.
The entire building. So a little like home generator you could put in the trunk of your car could light the whole building up. So we've really gone to great lengths to reduce energy requirements. And then we have about 1,000 solar panels so that we're a net zero energy building, the first in the United States. Given the big design challenge of our time, and I think our kids will reinforce this in coming years, is to design buildings that don't use fossil fuels. Because every time you buy a gallon of gas or have a natural gas heating or cooling system, or even for your range, or light the grill, you're damaging the environment in a way that can't be reversed. So as someone who could control the whole process, I made a simple decision, which is let's not have any fossil fuels for the project.
Give that man a tax credit.
Right. Yeah. So we what I didn't realize is that we're the only ones who've ever done this before in the United States. I can't quite figure out why that is, but there are so many other design decisions you got to make with respect to hotels that somehow this doesn't rise to the level of prominence. But for us, every decision we made, we had to solve like 3 different simultaneous objectives. One is we had to honor the amazing architectural legacy of Marcel Breuer. I mean, he was the guy that brought modernism to America. He led the Harvard Five and New Canaan.
Yes.
His students Marcel Breuer, John Johansson, Paul Rudolph. These were the leaders of the modern movement in America, and they influenced everyone else. So I grew up in New Canaan in a modern house designed by a Yale architect, Hugh Smallland, and I had parents who were designers. My mother was a furniture designer, and my dad was an industrial designer. So I have modernism in my blood, and I think maybe that's one of the reasons that I felt so committed to save this building.
Now, Bruce, when people come and check in at the hotel, are you going to be behind the desk, or is there going to be an outfit that runs this for you?
Yeah, no, the thing about hotels that not everyone realizes is there are three principles with hotels. There's the owner, then there's the operator, and then there's the brand. And some people think, it's one and the same. Early in my career, I did a little work on hotels, but it had been quite a long time. So I did a refresher program at the Cornell Hotel School to really refresh my understanding of the basics of hotel development and management. But most of my work in my career has been multifamily housing, affordable housing, supportive housing. And my recent projects have had a real emphasis on sustainability. My own home is a net zero building with enough solar and it's an all-electric building. So I sort of experiment with different projects. But for the Hotel Marcel, we went through an RFP process and selected Chesapeake Hospitality. They operate about 40 hotels with different brands and owners up and down the East Coast. And that was an important choice because we have to design a building that is easy to operate.
Right.
And so we needed their guidance along the way. Also, in order to finance the project, we needed to have a brand affiliation. It's very hard to get it, unless you're like a very wealthy person, it's very hard to get financing for a boutique hotel. So we affiliated with the Hilton Tapestry Collection.
Okay. Now,
that's a soft brand, so we're allowed to sort of do what we want in terms of preservation and
I've heard
design.
of Hilton. So
You've heard of Hilton.
Yeah.
And so the advantage there is that they have this very powerful booking engine that we learned early on, that having that behind you reduces the risk. We can fill the rooms much more easily.
Don't you wish you had a powerful booking engine?
I know.
V8.
Yeah. So we're
wow.
Basically for our project, the three principles are me as the owner, architect, developer, who doesn't really get involved in the operation. Then Chesapeake Hospitality, who they know all the tricks of operating a building efficiently, recruiting people that are committed to provide a high level of service. And then there's the brand. There's a 300-page document of brand standards. Our TVs have to be IP capable with 55-inch diagonal screens.
Oh my goodness.
We have all these things.
Yeah.
Because when you're a Hilton Honors member, one of the reasons you have that loyalty is you can go to any hotel. You've got a Serta mattress that's really comfortable. You have a certain thread count on your sheets. You've got TVs that work well. You've got a certain bandwidth for your internet.
Yep.
So we're doing all of those things.
And you don't have to worry about that.
Well, I have to worry about doing the things they're telling me to do.
Okay, but the Chesapeake folks have to.
Yeah. And it's hotels are the riskiest type of real estate. It's not like a office building or a apartment building where you sign a lease and you can relax for the next year. They have to sell the room every single day. And we also have a full-service restaurant. The other thing we did, one of Breuer's techniques for creating a prominent building is he added the 16-foot-high mechanical penthouse on the top of the building. So when I went through the building the first time, the lower two floors had been gutted because there was asbestos on all the steel. We actually bought the building from IKEA for $1.2 million, which seems like a real bargain for a 110,000 square foot building, but it was filled with asbestos, so we spent millions of dollars.
Value subtracted.
Yeah.
On the other hand, though, we were able to get some help because the cost of that counts in the basis for the 20% federal tax credit. So we got some help with that from the tax credits, but it was still a bargain to purchase it. But we did have this 16-foot-high mechanical penthouse on the top, which really had no mechanical equipment in there because it was sort of built basically to house the big trusses.
Is this what we mortals would call a rooftop deck?
Well, no, it's actually not a deck. It's an interior space, windowless actually, that had two courtyards. The elevator equipment was up there, and
AC.
then there was some compressors and stuff. But the main thing is that there were these two cutouts in the roof with cooling towers sunken into them, surrounded by concrete block. What we've done is we've taken the concrete block walls out, and we're putting in glazing so that we have now natural light filling that whole 16-foot-high floor, and that's our conference level. We have a series of 4 big meeting rooms. This space we call the loggia, which is a big open space for gatherings and exhibits. And so we've also met this other requirement to have a marketable hotel, which is we have 7,000 square feet of meeting space, which is more than any other hotel, but save the one
Good
conference
thing they
hotel.
had an architect around to come up with that.
Yeah, so we're trying to solve like 5 different problems simultaneously: sustainability, marketability, economics, the Hilton standards, and we've been working at this. The main goal was to honor the Breuer legacy. He was so talented. The stairs in that building are very similar to the ones at the original Whitney Museum. The what became the Met Breuer.
Yeah.
The handrails, he was best known initially as a furniture designer. His famous Cheska chair is the most reproduced piece of modern furniture in the world. And so he comes at design really at all different scales. He's as interested in the smallest detail as in the overall massing of a building. But the stairwell, the railings, these sort of blue steel, polished steel railings, the terrazzo stair treads, they're just masterful sculptures. And so we're cleaning all those and restoring them. We're also, there's this beautiful board-formed concrete that you see, the beautiful chiseled exterior, all of that's being restored. But then we're putting sort of newly conceived modern hotel rooms that are sort of minimalist. They're sort of designed with this Bauhaus attitude of sort of simple gestures that are bold but not fussy. And we also, my wife, Kramer Sims, who's my partner, has put together an art collection with original artwork, including these quilts made by a Brooklyn artist above each bed, and a collection of original artwork. So it's really infused with Bauhaus ideas, and we should be opening in April with luck. We're just putting the finishing touches on the project now.
Now, has IKEA come back and said, like, hey guys, can we put some meatballs over there, or one of our chairs up in your rooms, or anything like that?
Let the guests assemble them themselves.
Yeah,
no, that was a joke we had. Is we have a tight budget, so we'll have to have the guests assemble the furniture. But in fact, we had about a 1.5 year long negotiation with IKEA, because they had about 20 suitors before for this building, and they never really crossed the threshold because, in a way, they were better served by a vacant building than one that really wasn't going to enhance their own image. They're actually one of the more sustainable retailers internationally. Their own stores are covered with solar panels. They've made a commitment to be net zero themselves. They're very tuned to the sustainability with their own production. So they really liked our own commitment to build a sustainable hotel.
It does seem like a good marriage.
And believe it or not, the mirrors that we have in our guest rooms are IKEA mirrors. We had to commit to spend 6 figures on things from IKEA. So some of the countertops, the mirrors are actually, for $45, you can buy a mirror that is really quite nice, nicely detailed.
Yeah.
And it would cost you $200 anywhere else.
There's a reason why people go to IKEA.
Yeah. So we are totally on board with the IKEA partnership. We might have an IKEA cocktail. I'm not
lovely.
Sure I'm not sure that we're going to be
there's a meatball in it. That would be even better.
And they actually have a pretty good little cafeteria next door that has been my office during construction that looks out at the site. So we're big fans of IKEA. I think when you think about what the Bauhaus represented and what IKEA represents, there's really a lot of common ground. It's practical design, stuff that is not too fussy, that's affordable, that is design-oriented. Yeah, we're fully on the same page.
Well, Bruce, we're going to be bringing a group up there to New Canaan for the next New Canaan Modern Weekend.
Yeah.
And we plan to stay at your hotel.
Fantastic.
For one of those nights. So we'll be back in touch with you about all this.
We look forward to it. Come on by. It's the Hotel Marcel. You can find out a little more about us at hotelmarcel.com. And we welcome people who are passionate about design, passionate about sustainability, or just want a nice place to stay if they're coming into New England.
Thanks for joining us.
All right. Thanks, George. I appreciate it.
That was George and myself talking with architect Bruce Becker. When's the last time you read a novel, not a coffee table book, but a novel about architecture? Anthony Poon's new book, Death by Design at Alcatraz, is a great read about architects being murdered while competing for a huge museum of art on Alcatraz Island. Here's a sample. the author, reading from his novel, Death by Design at Alcatraz.
Chapter 18, Day 2 of 4, Stomping the Rock. Standing on the hardened dirt of Alcatraz Island, Magnard Jones gathers his tribe of architects. They take in the evocative setting, both magnificent and sinister. The museum developer, Magnar, and his lover, Celadona Kim, are decked out in clothing more suited for the San Francisco's popular black and white ball than to trudge around a wet, dusty concrete vessel that once housed the criminals. With the crashing roar of the bay waters behind him, Magnar stands proud, as if preparing to greet fans as if conquered the land. He gives instructions, challenges his architects. People, what does it mean to transform a federal prison into my house of art? How big, how tall do you want to build? Should your scheme sit sympathetically low in the topography or bold as a towering structure? My friends, I have handpicked each of you to tell me your answers, to impress me. Show me why you deserve to be part of my legacy. The setting of Alcatraz Island is both solemn and beguiling. Surrounding the group sits remnants of old buildings, storied concrete carcasses. Cracks on the island's tough surface shows the arcs of beginnings and ends, both life and death. One fissure hiding under broken glass welcomes a tiny struggling patch of grass, a flourishing survivor in a vast surface of ruined asphalt and compacted dirt. Standing guard, the remains of the taller buildings peer down upon the visitors and demand that the island is respected. Twisted, corroded iron bars protrude from beaten stone walls, as if a child's cowlick that won't lay flat regardless of the amount of saliva. The counterbalance to these desperate elements, is the surrounding icy cold waters that extend until unseen within a silky veil of fog, which on a luminous enough day provides a cryptic silhouette of the city docks.
That was architect Anthony Poon reading an excerpt from his new novel, Death by Design at Alcatraz.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs. And by Modernist realtor Angela Roll. Want to go with us to Modernism Week in 2023 and stay with us at the U.S. Modernist Compound? Email me, george@usmodernist.org. Okay, Tom, take us out.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 15,000 significant modernist houses, and access 4 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song is performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Rogue archivist Carrie Cesarino researched all the guests for our Modernism Week interviews. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I'll be back soon with another sitting by the pool, looking at the mountains, drinking martinis, talking architecture edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.
It's a tough job, but we're going to do it.